Nomadic A New Kind. Written by Brian Shinomiya. Narrated by Arnea Ahmetsvahich. The night sky hung over fluffy coal-like clouds, floating in an inky black abyss like the wreckage of ships in the sea near Anatu's back. She was unaware of the magnitude of blackness above her head due to the various spectrum of reds the world shed at night. She looked up to the mahogany sky, filled with thick clouds, red as blood, when a slow-moving cloud glided across the sky, unveiling a glowing ruby-red moon. She gripped her sword, taking in the overwhelming sight around her. Anatu had abandoned Europe, deciding to head southeast through the Balkans, an area from which she had just escaped. Now standing on a beachhead, the doorstep of a new country, she looked to the roughed hull of a boat. She could barely make out a crescent moon and star that adorned the remains. Rain trickled down on her casa and echoed off the trash littering the beach. The weather was a sign that she needed to leave and find shelter. The beach was as void of life as many European cities were. She observed her surroundings. Waves crashed upon the shore like an enraged beast prepared to hurl a storm. Anatu moved closer to the coastal city, prepared to draw her sword at any moment. The closer she reached the first building, the more she drew her sword. On edge, she felt uncertain about what to expect. The only sound was the sand under her boots, crunching with each step. She could sense something was out there. Anatu drew her sword with her right hand and slowly walked with her left arm by her side, a defensive stance if she needed both arms to swing. She held her sword, pointing the tip in her direction, prepared to lunge at full force and slice an attacker in half. With any slightest sound, Anatu would quickly crouch down. Anatu was in the open and fully exposed. She heard sand shift near her back and a chill ran down her spine. She used her peripheral vision to realize it was only a critter. The wind was brushing up against her chest. She started to walk towards the building ahead. She tightened her grip, still holding the sword that was her lifeline. A large creature crawled out from behind the building, right in front of her. It had 6 legs, with a bone tail trailing behind it. The creature showed her little interest as it scattered on its way. Anatu cautiously walked closer to the building, fearing an assault. Her breath was steady, silent as the dead. From the depths of the maroon night, a sudden large and dark mass hurled at her. She yelled as it knocked her down on the sandy ground. Warm wetness seeped into her clothes as she struggled with the hefty body atop her. She froze upon grabbing an arm and then another. Anatu quickly realized that she was wrestling with a human torso. Heavy footsteps approached her as she rolled the heavy mass of meat and bones off of her. Sand to her rear shifted as she retrieved her sword. She was then painfully kicked onto her back. Anatu opened her eyes. She looked up at a massive, deformed mountain of muscles, clawed feet, a scarred chest, and glowing eyes. Its head was enormous, bigger than a rubber tire. An immense roar shook the earth as sand exploded off the beach, raining down onto Anatu as a hungry predator launched its attack. Anatu had a hard time making out all the chaos. Large, bone-like legs stabbed the ground that surrounded Anatu as a muscular tail stabbed at the human-like creature that had attacked her. Wasting no time, Anatu scrambled to escape. Her legs sprinted with full force. She reached the first building and then the second when her arm was grabbed at. She was pulled back and guided into the wall of the building. Stars flew in her vision as she was thrown to the ground, allowing her momentum to carry her. Anatu then rolled onto her feet, Dazed, she spotted her attacker, another human-like creature like the one on the beach. It was staring at her with an eerie grin. She ducked as it lashed at her with a muscular fist. The force of the creature's attack caused it to stumble. Behind it, Anatu swung her sword, slicing into the side of the creature. Its howl of pain echoed through the night as her blade buried into its spine. Anatu stabbed the creature to finish it off, only to realize she held the handle of her sword while the blade was stuck in the creature's spine. Anatu yelled in frustration. She quickly turned around and ran in the opposite direction, as she was now only armed with throwing knives and spikes. Anatu had never sprinted so fast in her life. She found herself in a bookshop, hiding behind a bookshelf and trying not to pant. In that setting, she had to make as little sound as possible. She was defenseless in her mind. She threw her sword scabbard on the ground. It was useless now, considering she just lost her sword. Anatu closed her eyes, trying to get some sleep. What felt like minutes later, the sun was up and glaring in Anatu's face. She opened her eyes and sighed, afraid to roam without much weaponry. She carefully left the bookstore, looking around. The land that greeted her was a blurry landscape. It was the same sight as most of Europe, a city devastated by time and mass panic. She set out trying to find a new weapon. An alleyway was the best place to find a weapon. Humans saw alleys as safe shortcuts from place to place. The mutants saw them for prime ambush spots and feeding grounds due to their tight and cluttered spaces. There was bound to be a weapon that was dropped. Anatu came to a large stain of dried blood, the only remains from what seemed to be a group of humans. She found a long metal rod as tall as her. At one end was half of the blade from a circular saw. It looked like it had been welded to the rod. On the other end was a clawed hammerhead. This was not the ideal weapon for her, but she had no choice. It was time to get out of the alley and feeding troughs. Anatu looked at her surroundings. Large, dome-topped buildings with 4 towers stood tall, equivalent to European churches. Anatu wondered if the one she was looking at was a human settlement due to its hastily constructed wall. She let out a groan as she walked to it. The closer she dreamed to it, the more she spotted movement. She paused at a faint line carved into the street. Anatu looked up, scanning the top of the wall. Her neck stopped and fell onto a figure. It pointed at her, and soon she heard a gate opening somewhere to her left. She did her best to stand as still as a stone statue. A small group of men slowly surrounded her. They quietly looked back and forth between each other. She was forced to surrender her weapon before being motioned to follow them. Anatu was awestruck at being led into a settlement. She couldn't believe it. She looked around at the humans working, doing various chores like cooking, forging weapons and armor. Some people stopped to look at her. Some glared with curiosity, others with horror at the sight of a mutant inside their walls. She was curious why the women were dressed in outfits that completely covered their bodies. She was led into the building and motioned to sit in a chair. A short and stern-looking man came out of a room to question her. "What are you?" he asked. "A human," Anatu replied, causing everyone to exchange glances. "Interesting. Where did you come from?" "Europe," she replied. The man launched the conversation into a series of questions, asking Anatu about countries and various locations. She had no idea of their locations. It turned into an investigation, interrogating conversation. He was frustrated to realize that she couldn't answer almost all of his questions. She had the feeling they were as hopeless as her. "What country am I in now?" Anatu asked. "We call it Prithia," he replied. "What do others call it?" she asked. "Turkey." "What are you searching for?" "A home," Anatu said, hoping she would be granted one. The man shifted in his seat while voices murmured. "We haven't the food for another. Our settlement is on the verge of collapsing, and most people have left for the Holy Land," he said without blinking. Her hopes felt crushed in seconds. The meeting ended with the promise she could stay the night, only to leave in the morning. Anatu left the room and walked across the courtyard, choking back the tears. She had been led into a settlement that was once considered forbidden land for her. Humans surrounded her, but kept their distance, and she was told she had to be gone in the morning. She found a quiet spot and punched a flimsy metal can on a post. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Why am I so hated?" she asked herself. "What did I do?" She knew there was no reason as she dropped to the ground. She covered her face with a hand. Tears fell like rain until there just wasn't anything left. The betrayal she felt was a hole through the chest, worse than being attacked by any creature. She spent her life fighting at night in order to protect the humans, but she was never accepted by them. She tied a blindfold around her eyes to hide the evidence that she had cried as she made her way back toward the humans. Anatu sat in the bed of a rusted truck. A woman joined her. "Is it true that your kind sees the world in red?" she asked. My kind?" Anatu asked sheepishly and confused. "Yes, you're not part of the last group that came through 2 days ago?" she asked. Anatu felt concerned and started to think that perhaps there were more people like her. "They were not dressed like you or had tattoos, but they were green and wore blindfolds during the day." Anatu sat forward in shock. "The first group only traveled at night," the woman said, handing her a plate with a small amount of food. Anatu couldn't see the woman's face, so she couldn't tell if the woman was lying. "How many were there?" Anatu asked. "In all, about 15. Their skills in battle against the mutants were unbelievable," the woman continued. "Where did they go? Tell me," Anatu demanded. "To the Holy Land," the woman replied. Anatu had to find that place. She needed to see if there were more people like herself. "How do I get there?" Anatu asked. "I don't know. The blacksmith can tell you." Anatu quickly left and ran through the settlement. She had to find the blacksmith. Luckily, he wasn't hard to find. She shoved the man that the blacksmith was talking to aside. "Where is the Holy Land?" she asked. He sighed as he handed her a map. "Follow the red line starting at the star." A bell sounded and Anatu looked for its source, but only saw that people were making their way into the building. "Go. Night is an hour away," the blacksmith said. A man was waiting at the door to hand her back her weapon. The inhabitants of the settlement were taking up spots on the floor to sleep. She sat in the corner, far from the humans who still eyed her with suspicion. It was the first night she could sleep. Being surrounded by humans and not cannibals or monsters was a little more comforting. Anatu was not sure what to expect. The future always seemed unpredictable. The next day, Anatu woke up and tore her blindfold off. She was bursting with energy. She had never slept for so long. A few men were walking from window to window, checking for intruders. She decided to help with the task. "I feel safer with one of your kind," a man whispered from behind. "Excuse me?" she asked, looking back. She was near speechless. "The others were like warriors from heaven when battling the demons out there," he said. Anatu thought for a moment. "Is it true that you only need 2 hours of sleep?" he asked. "Only an hour and a half," she corrected him. The morning came, and Anatu was eager to leave and find her people. They now had a 3-day head start on her. She was almost excited to leave the settlement. Hopefully, her people were going to create one. She was tired of a life of constantly being on the move. After a morning of traveling, she left the coastal cities surrounded by the country. She had to make it through this land and one other before making it to the Holy Land. Anatu clutched her poleax. She wasn't a fan of her new weapon. It was cumbersome, in her opinion, but she was for once in good spirits and certain. She knew she would find a new sword along the way, or even find a group of her kind. She passed by piles of rubble, cars, and piles of ashes along her route. She tried to put the thoughts of running into mutants out of her mind. "Stop right there!" a man yelled. Anatu instinctively came to a halt from the demanding tone of the voice. She knew this would not be a pleasant interaction with humans like the last one. Suddenly, the others emerged from their hiding places, one on either side and 2 in front. The 2 that appeared in front immediately abandoned the ambush and ran upon seeing her green complexion. She stood tall, prepared to strike with her poleaxe in hand. She heard the scuffing of boots on asphalt as a 3rd man abandoned the fight. "Cowards!" their leader called out from behind. Anatu swirled her axe overhead before striking out at the man to her left. He jumped back and fell to the ground, stunned as she followed through. Stepping forward and whirling her axe again, the clawed end of the hammer, the other side of her axe, smashed into the side of the leader's face. His body fell aggressively to the ground. She struggled to pull her weapon from his face. The remaining man struggled to get to his feet and flee. Anatu looked at the fallen man's body, but he did not appear to have anything worth taking other than a metal pipe and clothes. She took the pipe as a weapon. Anatu found it strange that 4 men would back down from a fight with 1 person. They could have joined up and killed her. 4 humans are more deadly than 4 mutants, or at least the ones from Europe. Unlike the hunger or frenzy attacks by cannibals, humans can coordinate their attacks. Anatu scanned her surroundings, hoping to spot any signs of a group of people, but it was too quiet. She was becoming discouraged, but pushed on, determined to survive. The night was beginning to fall, and Anatu knew she had to stop, even though she knew her kind would and could travel at night. Being alone in her travels, she was afraid to take her chances. Anatu stood in a 2nd-floor window, peering out into the night, scanning the horizon and hoping to see a sign. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a flickering light in the distance. A campfire was close to her, but it was night and may as well be on the other side of the world. The howling sounds of countless mutants echoed in the night. Why do they have a fire? Did those people know something? Were they her people? Sitting in the window, Anatu had countless questions about the campfire. She fought the urge to sleep, only to succumb to it and gain an hour of rest. She awoke as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the land. She nearly fell down the stairs and ran for the door as fast as her legs and injured knee would carry her. As she headed towards the pillar of smoke, her heart was bursting with excitement. As the smoke drew closer, bodies of mutants littered the ground. These must have been her people's doing. They have to be there. The campsite quickly came into view. She stopped and looked around. There was nothing, no people, just dead mutants. She spotted footsteps in the rubble and debris of at least 5 people. She ran in the direction that they headed. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't draw any unwanted attention to herself. She jumped on top of a car to see if she could see anything. Due to her poor eyesight during the day and being blindfolded, nothing was vivid. She continued to run and look for footprints. Anatu spent the whole morning running and looking for tracks to follow, and she could tell she was getting close. "Hello," she cried out. There was no answer, and she wouldn't try again because of the risk. Thoughts crept into her mind. She didn't know what to expect of her people. Should she be afraid of them? Would they accept her? Anatu realized at that moment, standing on top of a car, that she didn't know what it would feel like to be accepted or how she would react. She remembers crying at the settlement due to their rejection. She spotted something moving in the distance. She hopped on the trunk and then onto the ground, howling in pain as her injured knee buckled. Her cry could have sounded for another mile. It carried through the wind. She struggled to her feet and staggered on ahead. She became aware that something was approaching her. She spotted two creatures ahead. To her left, a creature hid behind a couple of boulders. Another moved to her right. She clenched her jaw in pain. In her current condition, she couldn't fight. Anatu took a stance, standing with her feet apart, knees bent, and axe held diagonally across her chest. When the ambush sprung, a man rushed out from behind a truck in front of her and stopped. "Hold," he bellowed in a deep voice. Anatu's axe clattered to the ground. A woman stepped out to Anatu's left, and a man appeared to her right as Anatu collapsed to the ground, looking back and forth at the green-skinned people surrounding her. Cautiously, they approached her. She could hear them whispering to each other. "Can you walk?" the man in front of her asked. "Yes," she answered. "Are you with anyone?" the woman asked. "No. Are you real? Am I dreaming?" Anatu was becoming emotional as she was helped up. "We are real. We are your kind," the leader of the group said as he helped her along. "Let me guess, the humans rejected you," the other man said, sounding younger and with a smug attitude. Anatu struggled not to burst into tears as the two remaining members, another man and a woman of the group, emerged from their hiding spots. They eyed Anatu curiously with her exaggerated limp. "She's limping, Sasha," the new woman stated. "Yes, I know, Chloe," Sasha, the leader, replied. "She's one of us. We're taking her." His bluntness sent a warm blanket of emotions over Anatu. "We all know what it's like to be rejected, Chloe," the smug younger man said. "I know, Damien, but we're going to be slower due to a cripple, and besides, the settlement a day back that way would take her in," Chloe said, pointing to the direction they came from. "No, they are low on food," Anatu said as the other woman gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder, and the other man hugged her. She still didn't know his name. "Chloe, we are taking her, protecting her, and caring for her," Sasha snapped, putting an end to the conversation. "What is your name?" the man asked as he rubbed her back, trying to calm her. Anatu." She struggled and was more nervous to be talking to a guy than emotional. "I'm Leon from Germany." I'm from America," Anatu said, and they looked at each other. "Where is that?" Damien asked. "Across the ocean," Anatu replied, and they looked at each other again. Leon looked as though he was releasing what she was saying. "A long way from home," he said. Anatu struggled to breathe. Sasha held her tight, as the other woman did her best to comfort Anatu, sharing her experience of being run off the North American continent and the Japanese island at such young age, only being around the age of 5. Even Chloe did not dare scold Anatu for being reduced to a sobbing mess, and finally unburdening herself after so many years of holding in years of rejection and pain. "You're not alone anymore," Damien said as he slapped Anatu on the back. "There's at least 30 of us, a group of 10 ahead of us and 5 more to the west. I'm Mika, by the way," the final member, a woman, said. As the group started moving, Anatu was handed over to Leon by Sasha. He offered to care for her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "Yes, it should be not your injury," he cut her off. She looked away as she started to blush. I can't believe there are more like me." "Wait until we get to the Holy Land," Damien said from behind. "Why there?" Anatu asked. "The humans will flock to a place like that, and we will have our settlement," Damien replied. Questions swarmed Anatu's head. Won't the humans just overrun their settlement? She pushed the thought out of her head and focused on Leon. She couldn't believe she was not only looking at a man of her kind, but also her age. All 5 members of the group wore grey trousers and tunics, metal chest armor painted black, and armed bats with either saw blades or nails stuck in them. Damien, the smug little runt, had her poleax and the enviable sword at his side. As night set in, the group took shelter in an abandoned factory. Anatu sat against a forklift to rest. She applied pressure to her knee to soothe the pain. Leon was at her side, removing the blindfold. Damien returned her poleaxe. "Thanks, but I prefer a sword," he said. Anatu laughed at his statement. Damien shrugged and set out to secure their shelter for the night. Mika set to cooking the few small rats she managed to catch as Chloe and Sasha took a look around the facility. "Mika, Mika," Damien said excitedly. "Mika, look what I found," he said, presenting a massive spider for her to cook. Anatu's head snapped to Leon as she felt his hand on her side. "God, you're just bone," he said. "Our kind are able to go on little food and sleep, but you must eat." The smell of dinner being cooked had Anatu's stomach roaring in hunger. It was bound to be a feast, and her mouth was beginning to drool with saliva. Leon extended her injured leg. "You can have my portion," he said, sounding concerned. "I ate last night." Anatu felt awful. She knew how scarce food was. "Anatu," Sasha said, catching her attention. "You're our new scavenger." She knew scavengers were the lowest rung. "But I can fight," she replied. "That's obvious because you're alive," Mika replied. "My knee will be—" "You're the new member. You have to prove yourself," Leon said as he removed her boots from what felt like the first time in her life. She was shocked at how comforting the dull ache felt in her feet as she resigned herself to being a scavenger. She knew she could prove herself the first chance she got. What does one have to do to prove themselves as someone more worthy than a scavenger? Anatu's sarcasm started resurfacing, a sign that she was already starting to heal. It's been ages since she had the chance to show anything but brute force and inhumane strength. The world didn't allow for anything more, especially when you were fully alone, left to your own devices. "Well, first off, you don't get any of your people killed, which brings me to my second point. Uncalled sarcasm can be harmful, you know," Damien added, trying to sound like a leader right off the bat. "Damien, with all due respect, you're our youngest and the least experienced member, and lucky that our race is green, otherwise everybody would notice that you are as green as a Granny Smith," Leon said, turning Damien into a flustered mess. The rest of the group started laughing as they enjoyed their food. Everyone was having, considering the circumstances of survival, a great time. Anatu couldn't recall the last time she felt genuine happiness and safety. It was a luxury she could never get enough of. Surrounded by her kind, accepted and cherished for what she is, Anatu felt fulfilled. "So, for how long have you been traveling? Can you tell me more about the Holy Land?" Anatu's head was overflowing with questions, so many things she wanted to know, and up until this point, no one cared to answer them. "Our little crew has been on the move for a little over 2 weeks now. As for the Holy Land, It's a place where our kind has the luxury of starting a family and settling down for good. A place where we can kiss goodbye to the haunting fear of dying, Leon said, and let out a sigh as he scratched his head. However, the path to there is going to be rough. We will encounter countless mutants, or even worse. His face shifted with a serious tone. We must stick together if we want to survive. I'm sure we'll make it. We are a tough bunch, Anatu quickly said, trying her best to keep everybody's morale up. Damien stood up as he finished his food, deciding to take tonight's watch while the others got some rest. Not that they needed many hours, but still, having someone on guard duty made Anatu feel even safer. They knew what they were doing. Anatu bit into a meaty chunk of spider meat as she felt the warmth and comfort take over her body. For once in her life, she could put her guard down, even if it was just for a little bit. Your knee shouldn't take more than a few days to fully heal up. I will make sure we find some medicine for you. Chloe, our nurse and the only doctor-like figure we have, surely has something that's going to speed up the healing process, Leon added as an awkward smile took over his face. He wasn't good at showing emotion or happiness. The best he could do was an out-of-place facial expression, which sometimes looked more like a mutated cannibal than a happy person. Yeah, the injury doesn't seem too serious. I'll have something prepared for you by the first break of dawn, Chloe said as she overheard what Anatu and Leon were talking about. Anatu was just about to ask more questions when a sudden scream made her drop the food she was enjoying. Her stomach started to turn, accompanied by an adrenaline rush through her veins. A scream could only mean one thing: danger, and given that it was in the middle of the night, it had to be something serious. Within seconds, Anatu and the rest of the group rushed over to where they last heard the bone-chilling scream. They realized the scream came from Damien, which was odd because he wasn't one to yell. Despite being a rookie, Damien was no stranger to the unholy creatures that roamed the lands. The group was met by a strange sight upon reaching Damien. A little girl was standing in front of him. A ruined teddy bear with one of its arms and eyes missing. The rest of its body was poorly stitched together. The girl looked like a human child, malnourished and lost, seeking shelter just like Anatu was. Damien, let me get this straight. A little girl scared you so much that you let out a scream loud enough to get all of us running to you? Leon was quick to start joking, lighting up the atmosphere. Weren't you being a big man, giving tips and tricks just a moment ago? Mika quickly caught on. She took some steps, getting closer to Damien, trying to wrap her arm around him to see if everything was okay. She's just a lost little girl. Maybe she's from the settlement. Lost her way around on the way home and she ended up seeing our fire, thinking it was her people, Chloe added as she was scanning the child. Guys, not to be a pessimist, but something seems off here. What child would be wandering about in the night with no parents or anything? More importantly, how is she still alive? Sasha asked. Don't you think the mutants would have made quick work of her? Sasha's words made the entire group reconsider their approach to the mysterious visitor. She just appeared behind me, no sound or anything, like a ghost. She materialized out of thin air. I don't know if she's lost or not, but I've never experienced something like this. My gut is telling me that something is up and I can't shake it off, Damien said, breaking out of his silence. The child, after taking a closer look at every single member of the group, licked her lips before showing them her teeth, just enough so that they could see she was everything but a human child. She had rows and rows of glistening, needle-like teeth, glinting on the moonlight like shards of glass. She dropped her teddy on the floor, revealing that she was hiding a knife within it all this time. Before the group could do anything, the child let out an eardrum-piercing sound, making everyone grunt out in pain and fall to their knees, struggling to withstand the pain. Suddenly, more than a dozen steps could be heard. Nothing like the group had heard before. It sounded like whatever was coming for them was walking on all fours and was doing it at a rapid speed. Within moments, the group realized that they were surrounded by children, boys and girls looking no older than 10 years of age, all smiling and holding out knives, ready to dig into them like they were a freshly served dinner. None of the children knew how to walk on two legs except the girl with the teddy bear. They were slithering around, screeching and flashing their razor-sharp teeth, aching to dig them into some fear-infested flesh. The scraping and squeaking of their rusty knives became louder and louder as they skittered their way to Anatu and the rest. "Stand your ground, get your weapons and get ready to fight!" Leon screamed out, snapping the rest out of their terror-induced paralysis. Anatu got her makeshift weapon out, ready to bring death to anything and anyone that tried to harm her newly found kin. The end.